Have you heard of this concept called kusang loob? In the previous episode 40, I talked about malakas ang loob. I'm doing a series on words that we often hear in the Filipino language, specifically Tagalog, where we use the root word loob. Loob is the innermost being of the Filipino. And if you simply study the words that include this language, all of us will learn so much about the worldview of the Filipino. What is this kusang loob? What does it mean? How could it serve both the Filipino and the Filipino American? Are Filipinos truly bilingual? We use the same language at home but speak in love languages foreign to each other, together but separated. Kamusta? I'm Roanne, licensed psychotherapist mom, immigrant twice, first generation Pinoy raising my mixed Filipino-American children in America. I found that after visiting 500 Filipino homes, I continue to be a student of the culture. In this podcast, we would be seatmates in this beautiful cultural classroom. And by the way, did I tell you I need my kapeng barako straight from Batangas before each class? If you're interested in learning the deep intricacies of the Filipino culture, especially as it merged with American culture, talks about trauma-informed care and deepening your Filipino relationships across generations, which includes my fave topic, Pinoy love languages, you're in the right place. This episode is brought to you by the ebook, 5 Pinoy Love Languages. I wrote this many years ago. It is a beginning of a collection of the many ways or the different ways that Filipinos express and seek love. You could get your copy by checking the show notes. Another day, another episode. Welcome everyone. This is your Pinoy Love Language podcast host, Roanne Samuels. Kamusta kayo? Marami pong salamat sa pakikinig. Thank you to those of you, daughters, mothers, sisters, who've shared the content of this podcast to your fellow loved ones. And it's not so much about sharing me, but it's more important for me to share the content. So maraming salamat. Today we'll be talking about kusang loob. When you say kusa is to take your own initiative. One of the things that make the Filipino mom a little irritated, with the Filipino American and just with the youth, is that they say, wala kang kusa, you don't have an initiative. And so sometimes they do get impatient if they tell you to wash your few plates in the sink that's not yours, and you say, oh yeah, I'll do it in a few minutes. They get really upset with the waiting period. I shouldn't say upset, but impatient, and they started doing it. And then you're like, oh, hold on, I said I was gonna do it. And then mom goes, wala ka talagang kusa. It's like you don't have initiative. And there's a lot to that example, because first, mom is the one doing the offering. It wasn't your idea. So in that way, it really is in line with her definition that you didn't initiate it. And second, she wants it done at a particular time frame. And everyone's different. Everybody's patience radar is different. With this sample, mom obviously isn't so patient. Maybe she could just stand watching you sit down for 5 minutes. After that, the 6th minute, she's up. He's not doing it yet. So let's talk about kusang loob. What is it? It is, again, many of the Filipino Pinoy love languages are indigenous expression of the way we communicate, came from our connection with nature and our belief before with the many gods. Prior to the introduction of Christianity, in many ways, it's not very different from the ancient. Even when you think about the Vikings or the Celts, the Celtic culture I'm talking about. They do have this more ancestral leaning towards nature. It's when we started introducing technology, movement, a lot of movement from one place to the other. You can understand that tribes and people who stay put where they are, and we have not been staying put, but we stay put in the jurisdiction where we wish to live. But sometimes we move from one place to the other, but not like the Vikings did. Maybe one of the reasons you can check history is because where they settled, the Scandinavian area, Ireland, Denmark, it's pretty cold there. So you can only do very limited farming. So they did not become an expert when it comes to that. Rather, they became an expert with ships. And ships allow you to traverse the ocean and travel and move. People that have a very steady weather, perhaps, or those who have learned to tend to the land, they became the expert of that land. They can hear the trees talk. You could just really learn that from looking at indigenous Filipino culture, Native Americans. And I tell you, even the Celtic culture have that. So you become an expert in what you choose to do over and over again. I am just sharing this because all of this lexicon in our language and also the many Pinoy love languages that I share is really coming from the influence of nature, where we're geographically located, also our social political history, all of that. It is not telling the whole story when we focus on just one thing. So if you're studying an island, for instance, and you just kept looking at the ocean that surrounds it, but how about the sky? How about the actual land? I think this is the faulty part or the missing part when we simply talk about just colonization. And as you know, if you're listening to me, I talk about colonization because truly it has greatly influenced us. But colonization, our history, is only one part of our history. It is not the complete story, my friend. I share these things to expand our horizon. I am a student of anthropology. That's my other major. So let's go back to walang kusa. And when you have kusa, I think that would be easier to go in that route. You can sense. Again, it's always about sensing, isn't it? You can sense what the other person might need at the right time. Now, there could be a shadow side to this, but let me just go to the light side. I like that, the light and the shadow side. The light side is that it's so incredible when someone can meet your need just beyond them verbalizing it. The language is a creation of man. Before language, we may use gestures, which is also maybe someone would contend is a form of language. But we use our bodies, we use our movement in our face. And so that's an invention of man, language. And when you have kusa, kusa is attached to reading everything else, not waiting for language. And so he has a keen sense, almost like an animal that you can sense. You can sniff it. The wonderful thing about that is if you can get it, the other person feels so understood. And when you don't, especially when you don't have a good connection, you don't have a good relationship with the other person, it is easier to miscommunicate, to misconstrue what messages they're sending to you that's nonverbal. Because, first of all, you may not have the best experience when it comes to your exchanges with that other person. So it's almost like they're speaking another language, which is a nonverbal language. They're asking you to interpret it, and you're like, "What? What are you saying?" It's very hard. So one of the things about kusa is that the Filipino and the Filipino American very different. There's a lot more sensing in our indigenous culture, and there's a lot of practice that I talk about in my other previous podcasts, where a lot of rehearsing with our children so that they can learn this. I must tell you, it's also not perfect. Even if you were born and raised in the islands, most people would get it, but they would just like, that's too much. Or they can also get irritated, or also misread cues. I want you to know it's not something perfect, or, oh, I already know, I could sense, I could smell. Most of the time you can. But the difficulty, of course, with the American culture, we don't really hone that skill. It's almost like it's not necessary, although I would say it is. It's part of being human, because language is just an invention of humans as well. But here, say it. If you need something, if you want your needs to be met, say it. I hope we have a common ground when it comes to that. I think it's helpful to learn to verbalize, and it's also helpful to learn to sense. So, why is walang kusang loob? The positive part of kusang loob is that you give things freely. Almost like it gives you a sense of that you do things out of love. I know that sounds a bit cliche, but kusang loob is just being so generous that when you give something, you know that you're giving a part of yourself. It sounds very kapwa, and it is. So the word kusang loob is giving off something, a part of you, most of the time without being asked. It's just something out of generosity. How could this help you? How could this help our Filipino homes here in America or in diaspora? Is to observe what is being said beyond words. That might be helpful. And then those that have a hard time with expressing, to use your words also. We have to meet each other in between. We have to find a common ground. Sometimes you can teach younger kids, or they don't have to be young, but if they don't know this nuance, you can teach them in the beginning. Guys, when I'm upset and I started to like do that, that means I want you to do something. Teach them the nuances in your body. I do that with my husband, who's not Filipino, and my children, to teach them about the culture. So you could break it down. The key to that is your own awareness, which is usually the most difficult part, because people are not aware why they're doing things. As a therapist, when I am in family therapy with a Filipino family, and I sort of break down these nuances, even Filipino immigrants will say, oh yeah, that's the one, but they really have a difficult time breaking it down, much more teaching their children. So I hope the purpose of this podcast is to be that cultural whisper in the middle. I hope I'm doing a good enough job for you. I really hope there are Filipino homes would find a middle ground, because I know that Filipinos are truly, wherever you are, whatever generational wave, are so loving and thrive in connection. You all have that. It doesn't matter if you were born here in America, in Germany. It doesn't matter. You have it in you. So I hope that serve you. Kusang loob is to be genuine with your giving. Walang kusa is when you are not able to take initiative. My hope is you take initiative to learn each other's love languages, whether it's to learn to verbalize a little bit so the other person can read you, or to observe the other so that they only have to speak a few words, and perhaps you can understand much more if you take the time to also observe. Wishing you well as always. Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget, there's the 5 Pinoy love languages. Check the show notes. I will share with you the Calamansi Juice Academy. a few of my offerings if you're really interested in learning more deeply. Maraming salamat sa pakikinig and sa ulitin. Bye now!